one of the world-leading experts in the science of subconscious learning, motivation, and communication, speaking on change without thinking. Ladies and gentlemen, here I presenting you Dr. Eldon Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here today. I have to begin this morning by telling you a little bit about myself and what we're going to do. We have a very large agenda. In order to do that, understand what subliminal communication is, understand how the subconscious mind works, and boy, that one all by itself is an enormous task. Understand how we can empower ourselves and understand how we rob ourselves of power on a daily basis. I'm going to do it this way. We're going to start by building a puzzle. I don't know how many of you like puzzles or ever worked with puzzles, but the most unique one I ever saw, you had to build the puzzle parts. And then you assembled those parts into a larger puzzle. In a sense, that's what we have to do today. We have to take each of these constructs that universities can spend 1 and 2 years teaching, and we have to condense that, construct that little puzzle piece, and do so in a way that all of you understand. Then build all the other little pieces and then tie them together. So if you'll bear with me, there may be points where it looks like we have gone off on a tangent, but it's really not a tangent. It is a piece of the puzzle that we'll bring back and we'll assemble, we'll put together. "30 years ago, I was still compensating for a lot of things that I'd experienced as a child. And I hope by the time today's over, you're going to be able to look at yourself and see perhaps limitations you've self-imposed that for all intent and purposes were compensation mechanisms that you developed as a young person. And those mechanisms may have served you as that young person. That is, they may have been adaptive. They avoided conflict. They avoided stress. They brought attention. But in your adult life, you discover that many of them are maladaptive. That is, they're hidden away in our unconscious, and we have a stated outward desire. And our stated outward desire and our unconscious are incongruent. They don't fit together. So we may say, I'm going to do this, but we say that, and we say it, and we say it, and all time just ticks away. We never quite get it done. Now, sometimes that's a little change. I know a gentleman that is a very successful athlete, and I've had the opportunity to work with some of the finest athletes in the world. This athlete is someone that everyone on the planet admires, but he has one failing. In his words, he exaggerates. So he has a tendency to embellish experiences he's really done, and maybe to make up 1 or 2 he hasn't. And he finds it embarrassing because in the press, in the limelight, there's no room for that. But to him, the most important thing is his children. His 3 children that say, "Dad, that's not true. Why'd you say that?" He finds that humiliating, as we all would. So I think we can look at the greatest people in all fields and find that those, each and every one of them, have something they want to change. 30 years ago, as I said, I was compensating. What does that mean? Well, when I was a child, like most children in America, I was raised under what we call a no-don't syndrome. No, you can't do this. You're not old enough for that. You're too stupid for this. Indeed, I tell you something. My wife was born in New Delhi. I met her in London, England, lecturing at the National College, fell in love, got married. And one day my wife was saying, because I'm a perennial student, I'm always studying something somewhere from somebody, my wife said to me, "When is enough going to be enough?" I said, "What do you mean by that?" She said, "Well, you know, honey, I've heard you talk, and you were raised to think you'd never be smart enough. Has it occurred to you that maybe all this education is how you're compensating to be smart enough?" You know what? You're right. You're right. There's a time and a place to just quit and say, okay, you're right. I really don't need to do that anymore. If the world thinks I'm stupid, they're going to think I'm stupid, and it doesn't matter how much I do to make up for that. There comes a point where you have to let go of these compensations. I was using my education to practice criminalistics. Criminalistics is function of law enforcement. It differs from criminology, the theory that is taught in sociology, because in criminalistics, I'll actually run a lie detection examination, I'll conduct an interrogation, I'll conduct a forensic hypnosis examination, I'll testify in a court of law as a hands-on case developer, etc. Well, my father had come out of the Second World War, drill instructor, and gone directly into law enforcement. I had a good background in that because of my dad. My father and mother had told me, like I tell my 12-year-old son, you could be a good attorney, because whenever they'd say anything, I'd try and manipulate that to gain some advantage. And so they were always saying, you should be an attorney when you grow up. So I'd thought about that, and when I first went to college, I intended to be an attorney. I took the LSAT, the law school admission examination, scored in the top 3% of the nation. So I'm a young guy, I've got everything going for me, and then I discovered that I had a moral conflict with being an attorney. Not that there's anything wrong with being attorneys, and I'm sure we have some here today, but I didn't want to practice corporate law and be tied to a desk. I was thinking of criminal law. And my heroes were all criminal lawyers. But they were getting guilty people off on technicalities. There's a very famous case in the United States where exactly that happened, and the person recommitted another very serious crime. And there was a part of me that said, I can't do this. I just simply can't do that. That doesn't fit with who I am. But you see, I'd always been kind of a superstitious kid because I came from this background that all these mixed blood. My father had Native American in him, and I got Native American shamanism, and he converted to one church and my mother to another church, but her family, they had Masonic backgrounds and mysticism and Kabbalah. It was just amazed by how the mind worked and what life was, and all these mystical traditions. So if I couldn't study law, well, you know, I'll study the mind. I'll study what makes the mind work, because I always had a passion for that. When I was a boy, 17 years old, I was taking a beautiful young lady to a dance, driving I'm going to date myself now, a 1954 Oldsmobile, and I rolled up onto these railroad tracks. And as I did, the car stalled. And like it was a cue in a movie, arms started to come down, bells started to ring, lights started to flash. There was a train coming. I looked down the railroad track, and this train just seemed to be almost on us. And the girl I was with, Connie Despain, said to me, should we get out of the car? And the only thought that was in my mind was, if we try to, we'll get caught and the car will get drug over us. So let me try and start the car. So I said, no, sit still, sit still. And that train hit that car. It turned out, and there was a case out of this, but it turned out that this train had over 100 cars behind it and was doing nearly 100 miles an hour. It hit the car that I was driving on the driver's side. I remember seeing that train, and I remember trying to start that car. And the next memory I have, I'm standing in a field. And I'm looking over at all these emergency vehicles. The lights are flashing. Where's Connie? Well, Connie has been trapped in the car. Some time has passed because they've cut her out of the car. The car is smashed on the driver's side. And I mean the whole car is not that high. And I'm standing in this field. I identify myself because everybody wants to know who I am. I'm the guy that was driving a car. Connie would tell you she had her hand on my leg while I tried to start this car. She will also tell you, as she did in a court of law, as I did in a court of law, as they went through this lawsuit against the railroad company, that I was in that car when that train hit it. And then I'm in a field, and I'm untouched, unscathed. But the car has been so smashed, they've had to cut her out. And while they're cutting her out, she's asking them, "Where's Eldon? Where's Eldon?" And she thinks they're going to have to cut me out next. To this day, I have some colleagues that will say things like, there's no such thing as paranormal. This psychic stuff is all nonsense. Look, you're born, you die, ashes to ashes, that's the end of it all. And I can tell you that in my lifetime, as I've studied both science and as I've experienced life, I know that's false. It is simply false. There is no explanation for how I got from that car to that field. So there is some other grander something going on. And perhaps that happened to me so that I would find my way to where I am today. Not in law enforcement, but doing exactly what I'm doing, talking to you here today. And today I'm going to talk to you not just about the science of mind, but we're going to talk about the unconscious. And when you talk about the unconscious, you have to talk ultimately about the phenomena of consciousness. And the phenomena of consciousness includes everything from a simple awe to these so-called inescapable, unexplainable white crows. And I use that in the sense William James used it. William James said, great philosopher, psychologist in American history, if science has an axiom, and the axiom is all crows are black, then you only have to find one white crow to know that that axiom is false. Well, we're going to talk about a lot of white crows, not to generate any falsehood, but to open up the way we think about consciousness. All right, so here I am 30 years ago in a nutshell, and I have an agency, and that agency runs investigations for public and private sectors, and we run a lot of lie detection tests. And that's because we have a new instrument. It's called a psychological stress evaluator, developed by a couple of bird colonels in military intelligence for covert applications, which means I can simply take a recording. Now, don't confuse this with voice analysis. It has nothing to do with voice analysis. Take a recording and then examine that recording and determine if there's distress involved in the statements. Well, all a lie detector, polygraph or otherwise does is measure physiological feedback. And when we see distress in structured examinations, relevant questions, and it's there clear, but it's not in irrelevance and control questions, then we call that a deception-indicated test. Well, psychological evaluation works by looking at a muscle microtremor between 6 and 14 cycles per second that accompanies all voluntary muscle movement, including speaking. So when I speak, assuming that I'm not under too much stress, the sympathetic and parasympathetic portions of my autonomic nervous system talk to one another in what is known as a muscle microtremor. Now, if I become distressed, one will fire and begin to fill my system with adrenaline. I'll behave in a fight-flight way. And when that happens, this microtremor disappears. Now, the reason I tell you about this is because when it disappears, we'd see rectally linear patterns on a chart. And since we'd take all these recordings, I'd sit at a little hair recorder that recorded at 7.5 inches per second, but could be slowed down to 15/16ths of an inch per second, and run their answers, just their answers, through this PSE. Well, one day I was doing that, and as I backed up the answer, make sure I had the right needle height as we marked it, what I heard astounded me. What I heard was this: liar. Played it forward, it was a simple answer: no. Backwards: liar. And you know what? The chart said this person was lying. And you know what else? They later confessed. And we made a physical recovery, so we knew the confession was valid. Now, because of the technology we had, and because of my interest in trying to be smart enough, 30 years ago I had a career. It was a prosperous career. I was happy in that career, I thought. And I was also getting a lot of notoriety, appearing in the different media for some of the things that we did. But the universe didn't have that in mind for me. Instead, it put a couple of things in my face that really distressed me. I began to have trouble sleeping, and I began to have experiences, dreams and things that nagged at me, and I felt incomplete. I felt like what I was doing didn't really matter. I felt like what I was doing was kind of that much of what you might do with your life. And while this was going on, I happened to come across, still involved in law enforcement, this article. It insisted that the Los Angeles Police Department during the 1982 Olympics had experimented with subliminal communication. They had created a terrorist abduction scenario, and in this scenario they were going to use subliminal information processing to dehydrate terrorists. How are you going to do that? But what I heard was they tried it out on cadets in the academy, and they suspended it after 3 days because they had effectively dehydrated too many cadets. So I set about trying to verify this. Well, I couldn't get it denied, and I couldn't get it verified to this day. But something in me said, wow. You know, if I could get my hands on a technology like that, do you know I would soar to the very top of my profession? And why is that? Well, anyone that runs lie detection tests know that you're going to have a percentage that we call inconclusive. Detectives hate that. Lie detection examiners hate it. Because what it amounts to is you either have somebody that is using countermeasures to manipulate an outcome, or you have someone that is stressed, too stressed for the situation, and their situational stress bleeds into all the questions. So when you're done, you've got stress everywhere. You can't say they're telling you the truth, but you can't say it's deception indicated. Now, if you could do away with inconclusives, wow. You know, wow, that'd be a magic bullet. So I set out to learn about subliminal communication. Now, there were some people that were selling some programs, subliminal programs. And so the first thing I did was get on the phone and call them. How do you make your subliminal programs? You thought I was asking for the recipe for Coca-Cola. There wasn't anybody that would talk to me about that. It was secret, it was this, it was that. Now they were making all kinds of claims. You see, in science, if you make a claim, you'd better be able to verify that claim. That's part of science. So in other words, if you say I can do this and I did it this way, somebody else should be able to use that exact way and replicate what your findings were. And if they're unable to do that, well then that's not science. But all these people I talked to, there was a secret recipe. Access to how they did anything that they did was not possible. I'm an investigator. So I sent people out to buy everything that was in the marketplace. Because there were people making tapes, and they were saying, you know, this subliminal tape will fix everything. Okay, go out there and buy them. Now this is early in the 80s. This is an industry that is just building. And it's building off of a controversy that we'll talk about in a minute. But I sent them all out, find these tapes. They bought them, they brought them in. And I sent him to audio forensic laboratories in Los Angeles. Anthony Pellicano, the top guy. You know, because what Anthony will do, he'll take them apart and he'll tell me exactly what they did. So much for their Coca-Cola recipe. Well, I got Anthony on the phone not long after that. Eldon, I can't find anything on any of these tapes. Well, what do you mean you can't find anything? Well, there's nothing here. You know, I mean, there's music, there's ocean, there's nothing here. Some of them don't have anything, you know, they're silent subliminals, really silent. That can't be. Okay, if I can't do it that way, off to the University of Utah I go. Now these are the days that Pascal and Cobalt compilers are the way you run computers, and you have Mosaic, and so you have a librarian that does all that stuff, you know? You don't go in and sit down like you do today and just access the internet and navigate anywhere you want and not worry about getting lost, not worry about not getting home. I mean, my son, who is a savant with computers at 12 years of age, can't even understand what I try to explain to him when I tell him about Mosaic. I guess that makes me a dinosaur. I go to the librarian and I say, get me everything you can get me on subliminal information processing. I want to see all the research, all the data. You know, so go out there, search the term, and come back with an abstract, and then I can decide what papers I want. She does. It's very good. In those days, you paid for it. Well, it was a lot of money. So I start digging through these abstracts, and then from the abstracts getting the full papers. I can't find any literature on subliminal research that supports audio application. There is a lot of research on visual, but none on audio. There's no research. There are people selling tapes. They can't find any messages on them. I mean, this is all wrong. But there was a part of me that wouldn't allow myself to just quit there. So instead, I started devising methods for how you could create what today is what we call our patented InterTalk method. Now, if you have the technology and you're going to put words there, and you want people to, you know, relax if they came to tell you the truth, and you really want to build their stress level if they came to lie to you, what do you say to them? What do you say? We settled on the truth shall set you free, and that's what we used. We started playing these programs. Suspect would come in, they'd be seated, stark room, 45 minutes, they fill out forms and wait. We played nonstop. The forms are processed out, 30 more minutes, they wait. We played the messages. Come in, they take the test. Gosh, you know what? Inconclusives really disappeared. But the worst part of all this, see, my agency got paid by the hour. the confession rate in the first hour went through the roof. And there's a part of me that wanted to say, hey, look, don't tell me yet, will you? I get paid by the hour. I was amazed. I was really astounded. So I started sharing this with some of my colleagues at agencies, and they started to use it. In South Africa, they utilize the programs for interrogation. A friend of mine in South Africa got a hold of me and said, Eldon, you know, interrogation down here is done this way. Beat them once, and if they don't tell you, beat them harder the next time, and if they don't tell you, well, beat them again. And so they had a lot of confessions, but the confessions often didn't mean anything. They were just, look, you know, don't beat me anymore, I'll tell you anything I want to tell you. So we sent programs into there, and this is a true story. I get a phone call like 2 a.m. in the morning, 3-4 months down the road. Air us out another tape, ours broke. They became that dependent on using these tapes in their interrogation techniques. They were that effective. I have this technology and it's working. I have nagging at me this need to do something else with my life. And I don't even understand it. I just know that outwardly I look really successful. My personal life is a wreck. But who cares? I'm too busy for that anyway. I had friends that said to me, Eldon, you change women like most men change shirts. Well, they can't stand to be around me. What do you expect? My personal life was a wreck. But I didn't really even recognize that. The only thing I knew is I'm good at what I do. I'm successful. I'm getting a lot of media attention. I'm 30 years old. Hey, look at me. How wrong you can be. This nagging pulling at me at that point in time, combined with this discovery of this technology, gave me the idea that you might do something I didn't believe you could do. And that was rehabilitate a criminal. The warden at the prison was then a social worker, a good friend of mine, Lee Liston. He said, you know, if this can work, we should do it this way. Let's use the 288 facility, which is a youth offender facility. These aren't youth offenders. They're under 25 years of age. And in America, before they ever get to prison, they've committed at least 3 times. Let's go there. Let's run our study. So I enlisted another friend, a stat psych guy. This guy did things with statistics when he was in college that most of us looked at and said, yeah, that's really powerful, Charlie. You don't want to hear about it, though, and ran away from. He just loved numbers. We went out to the prison system. Well, let's try to lower hostility and aggression and see if we can't do something to interrupt the recidivity rate, the rate at which these people recommit crimes. How would you do that? I had a technology, but again, I was stuck with what are we going to say to these guys? So we go out to the prison and we run what's known as the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Most extensive psychometric instrument you can run. We computer augment the delivery of it. We have these guys, volunteers. We use the Fowler lens on the MMPI, specifically designed for an incarcerated environment, and run this sophisticated psychometrics. And guess what? Doesn't tell us anything that we don't already know. High self-alienation, high social alienation. Gosh, you get that one quick, don't you? I have 2 problems. I understand that the inmates are there because they have low self-esteem and they don't think much of society. But you know, what am I going to say to them? I have no clue what I'm going to do there either. As we go back to the drawing board and we take a look at what and how the mind works. In order to understand the process we're going through today, we're going to have to convolute some models. In order to convolute a model, we're going to have to think entirely differently than we have ever thought in our lives. The popular definition everybody uses today about insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and somehow expecting a different outcome. In order to change, you will have to give up something that you're doing. Uncommon sense says, I'm going to look at the same thing I've looked at every day, and I'm going to look at it differently. Einstein said genius is the act of seeing the obvious, but seeing it differently. The picture that we're going to look at is of these 5 stars. And I want you to connect those stars using 4 straight lines and never lift them from the paper. 4 straight lines without ever lifting your pencil from the paper. However you do it, connect all 9 stars. This, by the way, I decided to use stars for this presentation simply because they address something higher, and I hope in part that's what we're all about today. But this is known as the 9-dot matrix, and typically you would see it as only 9 dots, and you see it in an IQ test if you get far enough along in the IQ test. Because genius really does look at this and say, okay, there's 1 line, there's 2 lines, there's 3 lines, there's 4 lines, I have a dot. But it looks at it and sees how to solve this, and it's really very simple. Somebody here has done it, correct? I see a hand. 1. Excellent. I see 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Boy, I got a front of the class audience. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 4 straight lines now, and you never lifted your pencil from the paper, right? And you connected all 9 dots, right? All 9 of you that said you did. Is that correct? Well, I see 1 or 2 of you nodding. Look, when I try to connect these, isn't that what I try to do? Isn't that what most of you are trying to figure out how to do? And the reason I'm doing that is something in my system says this is a boundary. That's a boundary. Watch what happens if I just go beyond the boundary. That's 1 straight line, right? That's 2 straight lines, right? That's 3 straight lines, right? That's a 4th, and that connected them all, did it not? But I had to go beyond the boundary to do it. Now, the 9 savants out there that raised their hands, is that how you did it? You went behind the boundaries or beyond the boundaries? Because if you didn't, you cheated. What is it in the human condition that says that's a boundary? What is it that causes us to think of closed-in parameters? In our course today, we're going to talk about controversy. Controversy surrounds this subject. I would like to avoid the controversy involved in subliminal information processing, but it's not possible. It ranges from those people that think your mind was written perfectly and should not be tampered with, to those people that would abuse and misuse what's been termed one of the most powerful technologies to be developed in our time. A few years ago, the state of Florida contacted my office and said, you know, we have the largest population of youth offenders of any state in the nation. We have to get them a high school education. And I was wondering if this technology of yours might facilitate in doing that. Trying to reach them can be a little difficult. Trying to teach them the value of an education when they're just going to go on to prison, that can be even more difficult. So we created some programs. The first year they used them, 21 of 24 students had sat for what we call the GED, which is a high school equivalency examination, passed. And prior to that, they weren't passing 2 in 20. Teachers were volunteering. These young people's attitudes changed. The great idea was, well, let's take this out to the schools as well. Because in Florida, Dade County particularly, they have the highest dropout in the nation. What if we were to use this in our at-risk schools where there's high dropout? It should facilitate these young people. So meetings were called, the Board of Education got together, but as with everything, there comes a point where you're also going to inform all the parents. And when they informed the parents what they were going to do, there was a number of parents of a particular religious organization that opposed it. It was tampering with the mind, and that's evil. Because they opposed it, it wasn't used, and their dropout rate is the same. It's unavoidable to talk about subliminal information processing without dealing with controversy. This controversy really began with two people known as James Vickery and Vance Packard. Vickery is famous for flashing Coca-Cola and popcorn on Kim Novak's face during the showing of the movie Picnic. Have you all heard about that? Subliminal messages used to sell Coca-Cola and popcorn, used to increase concession sales. He was a New Jersey theater owner, and he announced to the world that for the first time, subliminals had been used in advertising to increase sales. He also owned a business, pre-com processing, and that business built a machine that worked like a tachytoscope that would flash these messages onto the screen. And his business, in addition to the theater, was to sell these machines from pre-com processing. All right. There was a great outcry by the public. And in 1984, the year of George Orwell, Congress had hearings. The public was so outraged that Congress was intent on getting to the bottom of subliminal processing so that it was not abused. James Vickery was called. All of America, he had become a villain. And Congress interrogated him. And in front of Congress, he denied ever doing it. You will read what we call cult science, where someone says Vickery sold popcorn and Coca-Cola. And you'll read elsewhere when someone says that never happened. The fact is, we really don't know. All we know is it caused an outrage. Now, we do know that he had the ability to do it because he had a patent on the machine. My own suspicion is there's not too much doubt, but if you can understand with that kind of pressure why he'd say, I never really did that. But with this controversy all over the world, particularly the Western world at the time, along comes Vance Packard, and he writes a very famous book called The Hidden Persuaders. It's an overnight sensation, and it spends and is dedicated in large to the covert manipulation in a lot of ways, including subliminal communication. Covert manipulation of the public by those that would sell you something, whether it was a belief or a product. Well, I was aware of all this controversy, obviously, when I first came into the field, and to a degree, I was also bemused by these manufacturers with their Coca-Cola secrets. I was cynical, I will admit that, about almost everything I read at the time having anything to do with subliminal information processing. But now I'm going to jump forward a bit so we can finish this piece of our puzzle and begin another one. 1990, And there's a very famous case in America. There's an English heavy metal group called Judas Priest. They've done a recording. Purportedly, this recording contains subliminal messages. Two young men, Vance and Belknap, have listened to this repeatedly one afternoon. Well, they had a couple of beers, and actually they consumed the equivalent of 3.5 beers apiece. Be precise on that. They took their father's shotgun, they went down to the schoolyard, put the shotgun underneath their head. Belknap pulled the trigger, boom, one dead. Vance, who survived because he failed to brace the shotgun, later told us he didn't want to do it, but he felt like he had to do it. Belknap had done it. He puts the shotgun up, boom, takes off the front of his face. Took him 4 years to die. Many surgeries in the process trying to save him. The parents bring a wrongful death action against Judas Priest and CBS Records. Judas Priest, known to use subliminals, admit in the court they have used them, but they didn't on this one. Yours truly is called in. So are a whole host of people. And I go through the facts. What happened on that day. The research. What we can say about what kind of message, what kind of mentality, what kind of personality profile, where would these young men have to be if this were to be a causal factor? It's clear. We find the subliminal message, do it, do it, do it, hidden in the lyrics that overtly encourage suicide in the Better By You, Better Than Me recording. The subliminal command, do it. It's clear. We demonstrated to the court. The court acknowledges it's there. No question about it. In my book, Thinking Without Thinking, I go through great detail on this particular case, including the full deposition. But here, we'll shorten that up. They start chanting, do it. They take a shotgun and blow the top of their head off, which is exactly what the album cover to Stained Glass shows, the top of the head lifting off. Pretty hard to say this isn't a causal factor. I find myself, therefore, opposed to CBS and Judas Priest in a court, saying, yeah, this probably is a causal factor. CBS couldn't find the original master. They hired a Scotland Yard detective to find it. They argued that the do it command was a coincidence of sound, not intentionally placed there. The Scotland Yard investigator testified that he searched and searched in England and in the United States for the master, because we'd need the master to be able to demonstrate whether it was coincidence of sound or intentional. This is wrongful death. You're going to have to demonstrate intention. They couldn't find the master. On the stand, our witness, our Scotland Yard investigator, was asked, did you look in the vaults at CBS? And his answer was, no, they wouldn't let me. CBS was fined so many times in this case by the judge for impeding the discovery process, for manipulating the media, the press, etc. and so forth, that it really just became kind of comical if it wasn't so sad. But the fines under Nevada law were like $40,000. Well, fining them $40,000 is, you want 4 pennies to me. But the outcome at law was the subliminal message existed, but there was insufficient evidence to demonstrate that it could influence behavior significantly enough to cause two young men to go out and shoot themselves. When I gave deposition and hearing at the trial, I was asked, is this a causal factor? And in my opinion, yes. But I was asked so many times, well, okay, it's a causal factor. How big a causal factor? Is it 50% of the reason? I can't answer that. Is it 10% of the reason? How? I can't answer that. Well, is it 1%? You know, look, guys, I can't fractionate it. I can only say, when you ask, is this a causal factor? If we subtract this from the puzzle, could we say they probably would have done what they did, including chant, do it, do it, do it? Not likely, but I can't tell you what percentage. That became very significant. During this entire process, what we learned was it's very easy to manipulate the masses with misinformation. It just takes a little bit of money and a little bit of cunning. Let's digress now. I'm back at the prison system 10 years prior to this, and we're trying to decide what we're going to say to the inmates. But in order to come up with something to say to the inmates, I have to understand how the mind works. Now, how do I do that? I'm going to tell you a little story. The story I want to tell you about right now is called The Chicken and the Eagle. And I want you to become a chicken for a minute in your mind. I want you to imagine that you are the star of our chicken story. You're really an eagle, but you're being raised in a chicken yard. Your peers that guide you are chickens. They're good chickens, but they too were raised in a chicken yard. And you have learned to dig like a chicken. You have learned to make a hole and get down in it on a hot day. You've learned to caulk when somebody lays an egg. You have become a good chicken. You have been imprinted, and that's the word in psychology, just like a young duckling raised with chickens or a young chicken raised with ducklings. You're behaving according to your environment. But you're really a very beautiful eagle out in this chicken yard. And one day, along comes a male eagle. And flying over the chicken coop, he sees the female eagle. And she's down there doing all these chicken things. And he circles. He can't believe what he's seeing. And a shadow falls on the chicken yard. And one of the chickens lets out the notice. And they all run into the chicken house because there was an eagle. Well, the eagle hides, and he watches the chicken yard for days. And one day, the female wanders just far enough away from the house that he's certain he can intercept her before she could get back. So down he swoops. He cuts off her retreat. All the other chickens get into the chicken yard, into the chicken house. He has her cornered. The chickens inside are all worried about her. And he says, "What are you doing here in this chicken yard?" And she says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, you're an eagle. Look at yourself. You're an eagle. You're not a chicken." "Really?" she says, thinking, what's this eagle got up his sleeve? What's he going to do to me? And the eagle says, "Look, as an eagle, you can soar. You can fly higher. You are dominion of the sky. As an eagle, you don't belong in a chicken yard digging. You belong high above all of nature, accepting the wind, feeling it lift you, diving and feeling raise." This just frightens the female eagle. But she's cunning. She is cunning. So she says to the male eagle, "Well, if I'm really an eagle, then you're not going to do me any harm, are you?" "Of course not, he answers. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help you. Well, if that's the instance, then you'll get out of my way. You won't block me if I wanted to leave, will you? No, I'm not going to hurt you. Look, I'll step over here. And as he steps, she runs to the chicken house. Safe inside the chicken house, she tells all her chicken friends how she outsmarted the eagle. And they all, wow, good job. Now, if you think about that story for a minute, and you think about yourself, were you raised with any of the same thing I was raised with? The negative scripting, the chicken yard beliefs. You're not smart enough. You're not old enough. You're not good looking enough. You're too stupid. You don't try hard enough. That's not good. This is evil. That's bad. You do understand then that if you have chicken yard beliefs, those beliefs can block you from realizing what you might want in life and what you're entitled to, your highest best. How many people here would like to make $1 million? Raise your hand. How many of you here would like to make $1 million this year? Raise your hand. Now, the elite down here are left out of this, okay? But the rest of us, folks, raise your hand. Want to make $1 million this year? Okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to say to yourself, and say it seriously, meaningfully, okay? I'm going to make $1 million this year. Say it to yourself. Say it sincerely. I mean, really say it to where you believe it. Say, I'm going to make $1 million this year. Do it. Is any of you getting back talk like, yeah, what are you going to do, rob a bank? How many of you here believe that you really could do that this year? If you really believed you could, you probably would. If Bill Gates is in this room, do you think he's going to say, oh, I wonder if I really can make $1 million? Million. Heck, he's going to say, that doesn't take care of my butler. Got to be a lot more than that. If we think then about our chicken yard story and we tie it to something I call the 4 faces of self, which is really developing from Singer's work. If each of us look at ourselves, there's an actual self. Think about that. You have an actual self. That's who you really are. In your privacy, wherever that might be, that's who you are. You know yourself. You know what you're afraid of. You know what you want to avoid. You know what you seek to have fun with. You know your mistakes. You know the things that you believe you've done right, that make you feel good. That's your actual self. In part, because some of yourself is hidden from you. And I hope you'll learn that today. But that's how you see yourself today, your actual self. Now understand that actual self is not your ideal self. You have an ideal self. You started developing an ideal self when you were very young. For me, a father decorated in the Second World War, cop, carried a gun. You know, I see him, he's got a uniform and a big gun on. It intimidates me. My ideal self, I want to be like that. John Wayne. 2 6-guns, back of a horse. And I began to rehearse these images as a child. And there isn't a person here that as a child didn't rehearse something. They began to rehearse a life script and create an ideal self. And some of that is perpetuated to this day. I don't want to be John Wayne. But some of that still exists in me. And it exists in everybody here. But the practice of rehearsing our ideal self that is definitely still continued. You know, you can see that evidenced. I'm a little self-disclosure here. I was a boy, I guess I would have been 13. And in America, we have junior high schools. So at 13, you go into the 7th grade. But there are also 15 and 16-year-olds in that school. And forgive me, some of these 15, 16-year-old girls were pretty developed. And at that age, testosterone is just being bathed onto me like it is every young adolescent. And I'm coming out of the gymnasium. We'd had a basketball practice. And there is one of these older girls, and she's leaning on the stool, and she's talking to a fellow. And she is, you know, for 13, is wow. And I must have gone by her just fixed. Because she says to me, "See something you like?" Oh. A hole devastated me. I went home and I rehearsed. Now, John Wayne wouldn't do that. What would John Wayne do? I finally found the line. If that ever happened to me again, I'd get him. I don't know. Can't see enough to tell. Now, we've all done that kind of thing, haven't we? But I'm going to finish this story, much to my embarrassment. As the universe would have it, a few days later, I'm coming out of school again, and she's standing there. I'm ready. And she almost word for word says, "Still looking? See something you like?" I'm ready. 13. I don't know. Can't see enough to tell. Well, come here, honey, and take a look. I never did figure out how to handle that one. So we have our ideal self, and we rehearse this, and we have the practice of rehearsal, and for most of us, we continue to rehearse to this day. How could I have done it better? What could I have said? What should I have said? And so forth. Then we have our ought self. That's our chicken self. That's what we were raised to believe would be the perfect person. If you loved me, you'd do this. If you really cared about me, you'd do the dishes like I asked. You know, you must not love me. I must have let you down, or you wouldn't treat me this way. I mean, haven't we all heard that from our parents or someone else? How am I failing you? I must be, because you're just not. Do you have any ought scripts inside your head? I ought to this, and I ought to that. Of course, we have, all of us, ought scripts, and many of them are good. They're part of our moral fiber. They're part of our real potential. But then we also have a lot of ought scripts that have nothing to do with anything except codependence. And what is codependence? Well, a codependent relationship is not a love relationship. It's a tacit agreement. It's a document that's unwritten that says, I will do this for you if you do this for me. And it works this way. How could you have loved me and done that? Have you ever heard that? If you really respected me, you would behave this way. Have you ever heard that? Or some derivation thereof? Those are codependent scripts. They are chicken yard scripts. Not that they're all bad, but some of them are designed to create a behavior, a boundary, like our 9 stars that I'm going to think within. And then we have our desired self. Now, what is our desired self? Well, you know, golly, that's who we really want to be. We want part of the ought. It's the good, the best of it. It's that ought that originates from the inside out. I'm glad I did not decide to practice law, because if I'd ever defended someone that had been guilty, got them off on a technicality, and they had recommitted, done the same, I would have that karma. I would be unable to sleep. I would bear that responsibility. That's an ought script I like. I'll keep that one. I want that one. But there are ought scripts I don't want. So the desired includes some of the ought. It includes some of the ideal. Gosh, who today doesn't at least want to be affable enough to have friends? We all want friends. It's part of the nature of our breed. The human condition needs to be loved. It needs to be accepted. So we all work at creating part of our rehearsed ideal self to be the person we want to be. And that includes all the things we're capable of doing, but we just haven't yet realized. And we have all the actual self, including, when you're that little kid. That too is who we are still to this day. Now, I think we have this part of our puzzle together. I'll attempt to show you how and why we said what we did to the inmates and what the relevance of that is to you today. And believe me, it's the most important thing I could tell you in all of this. We need to construct a model of the mind, just a model. Models don't have to be perfect, but they have to be complete enough for us to be able to get some kind of a handle on what it is that we're trying to do. In that process, we have to understand that there's an awful lot in our subconscious that we're not aware of. I can remember getting a phone call in the middle of the night, Sandy Police Department in Utah. They had an armed robbery. It was one of my clients, Consolidated Theaters, and they owned all the big multi-screens and little popcorn theaters, and they paid me every month whether I did anything, just $5,000 a month as a retainer, So I get this phone call, and they've had this armed robbery, and it's their take on a Saturday night, and down to Sandy City I go. Well, the manager of this theater, prior to going to work for the theater, worked for Hertz Rent-A-Car. And so he knew automobiles very well. But when we asked him about this armed robbery, the only thing he could say is, well, I pulled into the night deposit. I saw lights in my rearview mirror of a car, and then this big gun in my face. Now, it's a big gun. That we got many, many times. Point blank in his face. That's the only thing he could tell us. So we did some hypnosis right there, see if there wasn't something else that we could uncover, and that's what forensic hypnosis is. And under hypnosis, he was a gun-avid fellow. He told us it was a .357 Magnum, square barrel, silver chamber, identified the weapon. Told us the make and the model of the automobile he'd seen in the rearview mirror, because we stilled that in his mind. He even gave us a partial plate as that vehicle rolled away. It's still early in the morning, maybe 3 or 4 a.m. This crime has gone down at 1:30, 1:45. We have the suspects and we have the money. All because somehow stored in this unconscious mind was a near photographically perfect, repressed because of the stress, memory of what had occurred. Every traumatic experience we suffer as children, including, well, come here and take a better look. We have a tendency to repress. And there'll be detail about it. We'll just simply forget. We want to forget it. Just about everybody here should be familiar with what's known as a Freudian slip. And we'll come back to that in a bit, but a Freudian slip is quite simply, I'm going to say something to you, but instead of saying what I thought I was going to say, something comes out of my mouth that's relevant. And it's, oh, I didn't mean that. Okay? So we have a dynamic mind. There's a lot of controversy about Freud's capital U unconscious. And maybe that's due in part to his fixation on some things like the Oedipus complex or the sexuality of man and women. But one thing's for certain, this idea of an active, dynamic, subconscious mind is more than just a construct. It's operating in every single one of us. And it's full of memories. Memories from the time we first entered this plane to today. This unconscious mind predisposes much of our behavior. I said to you earlier in our $1 million analogy, how many of you want to make $1 million? Everybody's hand went up. I didn't see but two people, and I won't point at them, in this audience that didn't believe they could make $1 million. We know, therefore, that we have these scripts that are self-imposed. But do we also recognize that we can predispose subconscious thinking? Do we recognize that there is such a thing as false memory syndrome? We can use hypnosis, as is an instance in the very famous issue of about 6 years ago, where we had all these false memory syndromes, and there were all these young people whose father abused them or whose mother abused them, and they recalled this in hypnosis. There were lawsuits, there were defamation of character, to discover what? Almost all of them were made up. They were fantasized. You can suggest one idea on someone, and unconsciously they'll act that out. You can take a pendulum, demonstrate this to yourself. I've demonstrated it to a lot of people. Take a plain sheet of paper and draw a cross on it. You just simply tell this story. You know, the ancient Egyptians divined the sex of an unborn child or the sex of anyone by a pendulum moving on an X and a Y axis. If it moved on the X-axis, it was a male. If it moved on the Y-axis, it was a female. I want you to hang the pendulum over there, and let's see which way this pendulum moves. Oh, by the way, if it circles, that means, you know, you're uncertain of your own sexuality. Okay? Now, I guarantee you, every male you put that to that's heterosexual is going to move on the X-axis, and every female on the Y-axis. And they're not going to be aware that they're consciously moving it. Little muscle, micro tremors are going to cause the movement. So the unconscious is also very suggestible and very powerful at bringing out actions, even if we're not consciously aware of it. Let me give you an example of what we call an uncovering. And again, I like to tell stories. As opposed to tell them about somebody else, you know, I'll tell you about my own. I get into this field. Everything is working. I'm feeling really good. We're starting to help people. I'm thinking, I'm going to change careers. I'm going to sell this criminology practice. And I get a phone call from a friend of mine at the University of Utah, William Gillory. He's chair of the chemistry department. Sorbonne Fellow, Director of the Honors Department, today Professor Emeritus. Brilliant man. And the phone call says, you know, Eldon, wonder if you'd do me a favor. I'm really excited about a lot of your work. Would you share that with my honors class? Honors class. 25, 30 guys, students, kind of sit down informal. Yeah, I can handle that. Not a problem. Sure, Bill, I'll do that. Where are you meeting? Kingsbury Hall. Kingsbury Hall. Why Kingsbury Hall? That's a huge hall, as large as this hall. Larger. Oh, the Black Chemists of America are going to be here. And I'm president of Black Chemists of America. So I'd like them all to attend. Now, I've already told him I'll do it. But I can tell you right now, there's no part of me that believed I was really going to do that. 800 of the brightest people on the planet. Oh, I can't do that. I drove there that day, but I didn't get out of the car. Sat in the parking lot for a bit. Aha! I'll tell him I had a flat tire. I sped away. You know, the number one fear in America is public speaking, and I didn't even know I had one at that point in time, but I was petrified. I don't know of what, something. Maybe my zipper wouldn't be, I don't know, I thought about that, and I could not get myself to tell Bill, a good friend, the truth. Sorry, Bill, flat tire, spare was flat, just couldn't make it. I'm really sorry I let you down. Well, as the universe does things, if you don't get it right the first time, they give you a substitute teacher, and she's always worse. I have a client, Hollywood personality, terrified of performing. Can we create a program to help her? I'm living in Salt Lake City at the time. It's January. In January there, they get hot air inversions because of the Great Salt Lake. Just gets black and sooty, and you can't see the sky for a month. And so my habit in January was to drive down to southern Utah, the canyon lands, the Grand Canyon, all that beautiful red rock you see, and brochures, and blue sky, and I'd have my weekend in canyon lands. Tie together my notes, etc. So Friday night I finished making this tape, grabbed it, jumped in my car, drove to Zion's Park. Got to Zion's, went to the cabin. It's late at night. I'd better check this out before I ship it off. So I put the tape in. I'm going to play the tape, write a few things, look over some notes. I'll just kind of lean back, supine position on the bed, which I do. Only I fall asleep, and the tape's playing. And it has these messages. And all of a sudden, I have a dream. Only the dream is a real-life revivification. It's not made up. It's something that happened to me when I was very young that I totally forgot about. My father's side of the family was from Idaho. And they were very, what we call, blue-collar. They were lumberjacks and policemen and firemen and hard-working, everyday people. And my mother's side of the family, well, that was the DuPonts and the Wickles. They were business people, lawyers, judges, and they didn't get along, these two sides of the family. My dad from Idaho, my mother from Wyoming, they moved to Utah, kind of keep the families apart. But we have a family reunion. I'm 6 years old. There's a TV show that I just love. It's called Hit Tunes. And every night the show comes on, it plays the best music, the top 10 musics. And they're performed. And there's a song called Vaya con Dios. And I just love this song. And I learn all the words to this song. Because at 6 years old, I know I'm going to be a singer. And I sing it for everybody. Well, we have this family reunion, and there's tension boiling, and there's about to be a fight. My mother is going to rescue the day. She grabs me, puts me in the middle, and says, "My son sings. Sing Vaya con Dios." I couldn't hit a note. My voice broke up. I ran out of the room in tears. An adaptation took place. I'm never going to be a singer. I'm never getting close to a stage. There is no way that has ever happened to me again. I'll be a scientist in a laboratory. But you know, I have this dream, and I remember this experience, and I sit up in the bed. Doggone you, Mother. And I suddenly realize why I'm afraid of public speaking. Has nothing to do with anything other than, as a very small child, in order to avoid ever having that embarrassment again, I made many adaptations. And every one of those was designed to keep me away from anything that would ever just stick me in front of everybody and say, sing. I can today say thanks, Mom, and thanks to this entertainer. Because what happened is the messages on that program had a workshop with my subconscious, and I had an uncovering. Now, what's the value of an uncovering? When you're a child, you have a bad evening, and you're looking in your room, you're scared, and you see this silhouette over in a corner, and you know that's the boogeyman, whatever you call him. And you call out, and Dad or Mom come in and they throw the light on. And it's the way you put your pants on the door, where you suddenly know what it is. And they turn off the light. It's the same thing, but I know what it is, and it no longer has power on me. But if I don't know what it is, if I haven't made that uncovering, it's got a lot of power. One of the things that we therefore have to understand is that we not only have all this material in our subconscious, but this material is designed by its nature to hide itself from us. Because if it shows itself, or it shows the mechanism that it's using to protect us, the mechanism no longer works. And we'll get to defense mechanisms in a minute. It's possible that, like fleas in a circus, trained under a glass dome, or an elephant as a baby, tethered with a huge chain. We reach the edge of the chain, and after we've fallen down sufficiently, no longer pull on that chain. And then as an adult elephant, you can tether me with a shoestring. I'm not going to pull on it because my experience taught me I can't go anywhere. We have self-imposed limitations, each and every one of us. These limitations create expectations. And as you'll see, our expectations have a whole lot to do with how we view the world, how we view health, wellness, success, or our potential as a species or an individual. There's a story, again, I like to tell about expectations, because it helps us understand that everything that we may expect is not necessarily what it should be or what's a good outcome. There's a marvelous country western song. A young man, he's in love with his high school cheerleader, but she'll have nothing to do with him. And gosh, you know, he ends off going out and marrying someone else. But that someone else is just perfect. And then he goes to a reunion, and there he sees this childhood love. And the lyrics to this song I'll never forget. Thank God for unanswered prayers, because he has prayed to God that she would love him. And now he sees her, and she's hostile and bitter, and 20 years have passed, and it's thank God for unanswered prayers. A lot is just perspective. Well, the story goes this way. Civil War days, United States of America, North versus South. The Northern Army is marching, and they're subscripting every able-bodied man into the Army to fight. And the word is that they're coming, and they're also buying horses and those things that are necessary for the Army. Well, there's a farmer and his boy is of the age to be subscripted, and the farmer is naturally worried about it. He depends on his boy to plow the fields and do the work. He's gotten a little too old to do it. And one day his boy is out plowing, and their mule jumps into the air, bolts, and runs away. Well, without that mule, can't plow, can't farm. And the whole town turns out. Such bad luck. Such bad luck. And the farmer says, good luck, bad luck, who knows? Well, they left the gates open on the corral, hoping that this mule would come back. And the next morning when they get up, instead of a mule, it's a whole herd of wild horses that have gone in to get the feed they laid out. So they run out and they throw the gates closed. Whole herd of horses with an army marching, the whole town. Such good luck. Good luck. And the farmer, good luck, bad luck, who knows? The next day, his son goes out to break these horses. First horse he gets on, son fishes, goes over backwards, breaks his leg. And the whole town, what bad luck. What bad luck. And the farmer, good luck, bad luck, who knows? Next day, the army marches in. They subscript every able-bodied man. Of course, they don't take the farmer's boy. He's got a broken leg. And the whole town, such good luck, such good luck. And the farmer, good luck, bad luck, who knows? Our expectations about life should fit somewhere in that model. Much of what comes to us really comes to us for some good. If our expectation is there is some good inherent in everything that comes to us, a couple of things change. First thing changes is we have less stress in our life. We feel better. We're healthier, you know. Gosh, that's not bad. Second thing that changes is we find more joy in life, more awe. William James coined the word pragmatist, and I think I'm first, last, and always a pragmatist. And this man impacted me so much, my youngest son's name is William James. A pragmatist is one that says, if it works, use it. If it doesn't, don't. So I've made my career changes now, and I'm going along, and I'm telling people, good luck, bad luck, who knows? You know, meet life with gratitude. And I'm pulling into my offices one day in my new Cadillac Eldorado. And this car comes zipping out, just backing at like 50 miles an hour out of a video store that's in the complex where my offices are. Boom, right into my car. Start to snarl. I said, no, wait a minute. Everything comes to you for some good reason. Just remember that. So I developed an attitude right then and there. I can't wait to see what good comes from this. Got out of the car, and this man jumps out of the car. You hid behind me? You did that on purpose? You were waiting for me to hit your car? I'm going, what? What, is he crazy? Look at this, is a brand new car. What are you driving, that old junker? What are you talking about? You know, I don't say any of that. I'm just standing there. You know, I can't believe this guy's saying all that. Law enforcement's quick because there's a restaurant right there, great coffee shop, and they're always hanging out in coffee shops. We know that, right? They're right there. They're laughing. I'm doing everything I can do not to laugh at this man because he is really distressed that he has smashed into my car broadside. I drove away. My car was fixed. I thought about that. You know, what did I get out of this? Well, at least I got this. I felt better. I didn't get all stressed out. I met this person in a whole different space. I didn't get angry and start yelling back at him. It didn't get violent or anything. I felt sorry for this man who had just smashed into my brand new car. That's probably a little more healthy, isn't it? Than getting angry, flooding my system with adrenaline and cortisol and other neurochemicals that we'll talk about in a bit. Good luck, bad luck, who knows? Our expectations should fit there. But do they? Well, for most of us, no. And there are lots of modalities that we recognize that we would like to use to change that. Some work, and some don't. I've listed just a few up there. Autogenic training, affirmation, hypnosis, neurolinguistic programming, visualization, muscle testing, etc. Muscle testing is a big thing right now in Europe and in the United States. Muscle testing, you hold your arm out, and is this good for you? Is this bad for you? It's all. But remember, the subconscious can predispose those answers. So there becomes a question about, well, now I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I know how that mind works. So, am I going to use that to uncover some strategy in my subconscious that is self-defeating? Probably not, because my subconscious is smarter than I am. It's that simple.